Hello, I'm Stuart Kime. I'm the Director of Education at Evidence-Based Education, and this is a presentation for rEDLoom in April 2020, in which I'm going to talk about some guidelines for using multiple choice questions, particularly in the context of distance learning. And in doing so, I'm actually just following on from a presentation that my colleague Rob Coe and I were going to do together, but until we realised that our technical ability was not quite up to scratch. So we've put this together as two separate parts. And in his presentation, Rob was really talking about the use of assessment specifically as a kind of tool for promoting learning. Talking about things like retrieval practice and such like, and some of the kind of cognitive benefits of assessment. And I'm going to continue that by looking specifically at the use of multiple choice questions as a tool that teachers can use, and I've seen teachers been using in an online context for distance learning purposes. But obviously, multiple choice questions are useful for a range of different purposes. Collecting high quality information, they can be used for that, also for the purposes of the things that Rob was talking about, kind of engaging students in motivating them, in helping them to kind of reinforce the things that they have been learning. But I also want to echo what Rob has said about distance learning presenting a lot of challenges. And that it is really hard, and that assessment within that context actually, is incredibly difficult. Doing it well, requires a lot of skill and really well-honed techniques, and it takes time. But hopefully, in this presentation and the one that Rob has done, we can offer something useful to you if you're thinking about how you might go about using assessment wisely and meaningfully in a distance learning context. So just to get us started, I just want to show an example of a multiple choice question, just so that we're really clear on certain things. So firstly, we've got a question, and later on we'll kind of talk about that as one of the guidelines that actually we should ask a question. It sounds really obvious, but sometimes it's not what we do. And the question here has got three possible responses, and I've listed them A, B, and C. Generally speaking, it's good practice if you are showing responses that you use a vertical formatting like this, and then also use letters rather than numbers. And that's just for the kind of the ease of use and the clarity with which students kind of experience each individual question. And so in this instance, answer B is what we would call the key, the correct answer. And then I've got two distractors in there, two incorrect options, A and C. And as we'll talk about later, it's done deliberately that they all kind of are broadly similar. But there's more value that we can get out of multiple choice questions than solely a right or wrong answer. And that's one of the things that we'll pick up a little bit later on. But in this case, I just want to establish that we've got a STEM, that's the question at the top, and we've got distractors, the incorrect options, and then one correct option, which is generally known as the key. Okay, so some guidelines then to help us with the construction of multiple choice questions. And these are all drawn from reviews of research evidence that's been done into question design. So firstly, any multiple choice question should really align with clear and well-defined learning objectives. So basically, the kind of first rule of thumb is that a good multiple choice question is well aligned with the curriculum, and the content that is examined should be important and not trivial. It takes time to construct really good multiple choice questions. It takes time for students to answer them. And also it takes cognitive engagement. Students are thinking hard, hopefully, about these questions. So we don't want to spend our time or their time on things that aren't really meaningful and important and really well aligned with the curriculum. In our questions, we don't want to include unnecessarily hard vocabulary. So unless you're really testing a student's knowledge of unnecessarily hard vocabulary, then the vocabulary that should be used should be appropriate to the thing being assessed. So the kind of construct of interest, but then also for the audience, the students themselves, it should be accessible. The second point there, that we need to take into account potential gender and cultural differences because of the potential there for bias to be introduced into the questioning process. So even things such as the names that are used if you're giving sort of little example-based questions, and trying to ensure that there is parity and balance there, that we don't end up with one particular group being either advantaged or disadvantaged by virtue of how they feel about the questions, how they engage with them. And then finally, don't include sort of deliberately tricky questions. Don't try to catch people out. And also don't include opinion-based questions. And multiple choice questions just do not work for opinion-based questions by virtue of the fact that opinions are personal, are subjective, and so on. And actually, what we're trying to do with multiple choice questions most often is to ascertain something about what somebody knows or does not know, and so we need that kind of stability of an objective question. So we talked about the STEM earlier, so that's the question itself, and that question, as we kind of alluded to before, needs to be meaningful, and so we're trying to focus in on asking a question about an area of the curriculum that is really important, that is going to help the student, help the teacher to understand, how they're getting on and where to go next, and so on. And try to actually ask the question as a question and avoid statements or lines such as "choose the statement which is true," because then we're kind of, we're opening things up in too kind of broader way for students who are reading the question than we would get if we asked a very, very specific, tight question about something that was really, quite curriculum aligned and important to students' learning progressions. And clearly, we don't want to put in irrelevant material. So things that distract a student's thinking away from the thing that you want them to be thinking about, the kind of curriculum aligned topic, are really unhelpful. So cleaning up the questions and the question environment as best you can is really really important. Try to avoid phrasing the stem of the multiple choice question negatively. So avoid those instances where you put the word "not" in. Which of the following is not an example of something? Because quite often, even when when students are reading a question, and in a distance learning kind of environment, they may actually not be reading it, maybe hearing it. That "not" can easily be missed. If you do need to use a negatively phrased question, then if it's on screen, put it in bold letters, underline it, make it really, really clear. And then the stem should be a question. So actually ask a question. Avoid a kind of fill in the blanks or a statement or anything like that. Just stick with asking a really, really well-focused question. So then we move on to the alternatives, and with these alternatives that we've got, remember, a key, which is the correct answer, and then probably two distractors. And it's worth just pointing out at here that sometimes it's easy to think that the more options that you put in there, the better. So a question that had, say, 4 options or 5 options seems intuitively to be better than having just 3 options. I tend to go with 3 because, if you think about it, you've got one answer which is clearly correct, and it's then fairly easy to come up with one other answer which is clearly incorrect. But then when you start to come up with other incorrect answers which are plausible, and this is the trick, it gets really hard to come up with enough that are plausible and therefore don't kind of flout those guidelines of irrelevance and trickiness and things like that. And equally, one of the ways in which you can enhance the value of a multiple choice question is by having your STEM asking the question, having one of your options clearly is the key, the correct answer, but then with the 2 distractor incorrect answers, try to have each one do a little bit more work. And by that, what I mean is that if a child responds with say A as the incorrect answer, then that should tell you something about maybe a misconception or an element of prior knowledge that perhaps they're a little bit shaky on. Whereas if they chose the other incorrect option, maybe it's C, then that should suggest to you that they probably have got that wrong, but for a different reason, and should then help you to kind of be pointed in a certain direction and say, well, if it's A, then actually I know that these children who answered in that way probably don't understand this particular concept or have this particular bit of knowledge really secure. And likewise, C, it would be for some different reason. So then you can make your multiple choice questions work a bit harder than just giving you a sort of binary right or wrong. And really, when you design those questions, try to hold one kind of rule above all else, I guess. And that would be that for any student who truly knows their stuff, who really knows the thing that's being tested, then there should be one clearly right answer in the list of 3 that you give. But then for any other student, there should be 3 plausibly right answers. So we're trying to discriminate as best we can between those who truly know it and those who don't, by keeping those options as tight as we can together, but then by making them work a bit harder for us by providing those bits of information that would suggest that for one reason or another, a child has got the answer wrong. So those alternatives, as it says here, should be similar in content, and that's why with my example earlier, I had Anne Hathaway, Anne Hadaway, and Anne Haraway. The alternatives should be mutually exclusive and not overlap, so there should be real clarity in keeping them kind of separate. And also, one of the really common mistakes is that in the correct answer, you tend to offer more detail. Basically, the correct answer is often longer when you look at multiple choice questions, some of which haven't been designed all that well. So it's if you're going for a guess, if you're really unsure about the answer, then oftentimes it's easy just to pick that one because there's more detail in it. And then you have to question the quality of the information that's being generated, because the reason for a student picking that is actually because the question was doing something that led them to that, as opposed to them knowing or not knowing the answer. So here I've just got a couple of examples of not great questions that were created by my colleague, our head of teaching and learning, CJ Rauch. And in this first question, you can see here that he's put in a blank. And number one, the STEM is not a question. And so, it's problematic from that point of view. We don't have the vertical formatting of the options beneath of the alternatives. But then also he's giving clues away here by virtue of the fact that his STEM starts with A, and then we've got answers that begin with vowels beneath, and so on. Equally, the length of the line that he's left there in the stem is probably it's much shorter than the chocolate chip brownie with cream as well. So then that's kind of leading us towards an answer. In this case, I can confirm that it is in fact B. CJ's favourite dessert is actually a cake. And in the second question, what does CJ keep in his boot? So he's gone for this vertical formatting, but he's gone for a rather sort of natty kind of like diagonal there, which is just distracting for a start. He's got a capital A and a capital D, and then lowercase b and c. It's all over the place, and it also he's gone for this awful answer D, none of the above. This is what's called a type K answer, and just don't bother using them because they really give you no useful information. So in that second question, we get rid of that third answer. It doesn't really help us. But also there's another kind of interesting factor to consider about this question, and that's that CJ is from the United States. And a boot, as we might understand it, or certainly that I understand it here in the UK, is a part of my car in which I could keep these things. But is CJ referring to some footwear? Is he referring to a part of the car when he's talking about what he keeps there? So all kinds of problems with these two questions. And if only CJ had used some of the rules that we've already gone through. So there are ways that we can improve those questions quite quickly just by using some of the kind of guidelines that we've talked about there. So those are just a few ways in which multiple choice questions can be designed to try to help give you a piece of information about students' learning, and also to engage them in retrieving that information and to try to kind of embed through the act of retrieval. And I've seen teachers innovating in all kinds of different ways with online learning, trying to generate answers in a Zoom meeting, for instance, by getting their students to actually just hold up bits of paper with a letter A, B, or C on it to give a response, coloured cards, all kinds of things. So it is possible to do, but it takes time and it takes effort to assemble really, really, really kind of strong questions that get to the heart of what you need to know. And clearly, in a short video like this, there's no way that we can go into massive depth on lots of these areas. So we've skimmed through some of those guidelines, but I'll recap by saying that first of all, it is hard to use assessment really well, and multiple choice questions themselves require skill and a bit of effort to use them well, to deploy them well. But the value that they can give you back in terms of efficiency and the quality of the information that you get, is often really worth the expenditure of your time and effort, I think. And it's a great one to collaborate on with colleagues, to share ideas about common misconceptions, to base your multiple choice questions around those common misconceptions to make sure that they align with the curriculum. And then also just to remember those things about make the distractors work really hard for you by pointing towards different misconceptions within the options, so that they would lead you towards reteaching, for instance, different bits of material depending upon the answers given. And also that for a child who truly knows their stuff, there should be only one clearly right answer. And for anybody else, there should be 3 plausibly right answers in the options to the question. So I'm going to finish now just by suggesting some resources that might be of use to follow up on this. So first is just a blog post that was written by a former colleague of mine, Aranya Ventista, and it's all about improving the quality of multiple choice questions. So I'd highly recommend that, and the link is at the bottom of the screen there. But I'm also going to show you something else that's on our website. So I'm just going to dip out of my presentation there. And on the evidence-based education website, and the web address there is just at the top. It's just evidence-based.education. If you go to the resources tab at the top there, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of different things, including the blog that I mentioned before, podcast archive, and so on. But the most efficient way to get access to all of that stuff, and in a kind of neatly organized way, is to go to the resource library. And if you click on that link there, it takes you through to a page that looks like this. So you have to just kind of you have to register your details, and then it takes you through into this resource library. And in here, what you'll find is, for instance, Rob's great teaching starter pack. So there's a whole load of stuff that Rob has put together there, which may be of interest, to outside of the kind of world of looking at multiple choice questions. But if you want to know more about the kind of question design side of things and what have you, in the ebook section, there are some that are really useful. The What Makes Great Assessment, What Every Teacher Needs to Know, and Designing Great Assessment ebooks. I think I'd highly recommend those. And just so you know, further down, you can read the new manifesto for evidence-based education that Rob and I wrote a little while ago. We've also included a set of videos and webinars. There's Rob and CJ talking about retrieval practice and a bunch of others there. Loads of podcasts, 31 podcasts, all kinds of stuff there. And at the bottom here, you can also try out the sample courses on things that we run that might be of interest to you if you're looking to improve the quality of questions that you're asking to try to support both your own teaching and improve the quality of the information that you're using, but also for a lot of the purposes that Rob was talking about to support students' learning through retrieval and other means. Okay, so thanks very much. It's been a real joy to talk to you about something that I really love. And if I get myself back to the final slide in my presentation, there we go. I hope you stay safe and well. And please, if there is anything that I can do to support you and your colleagues in the work that you're doing on assessment, then just drop a line. Both my email address and our Twitter are there, so get in touch. But thanks very much for watching and listening.